What is up, guys? This is Luke Hill for Kit Guru, and I'm here sat between a bunch of hardware and a fancy monitor, a water-cooled system, as you can probably see. And in this one, we're going to be looking at high refresh rate gaming. Now, I know high refresh rate gaming is a topic that the regular hardened enthusiast Kit Guru audience is generally a fan of. I'm a fan of high refresh rate gaming too. So when Gigabyte reached out to us and asked if we wanted to work with the Aorus FI27Q monitor and do any work with that, we thought, yes, this would be a great opportunity to actually look at the hardware required to drive a high refresh rate gaming monitor like this. It's really not simple. It's not a case of just buy the fastest GPU and don't worry about your CPU. When you try to push frame rates above 120, 144, 165 FPS, you really do need a lot of hardware on the CPU side of things as well. So before I go into more details in this video, if you like what we do here at Kit Guru, it really helps us if you give us a like, if you subscribe, if you hit the bell icon and watch our videos. It also really helps us out if you head on over to the main Kit Guru website and read our written content. And if you want to help us even more, you can check out our Patreon. You can buy a cool t-shirt from our merch store. Really, there's a lot of work involved in something like this, so any support that you can give us really helps out, and we hope you enjoy the content too. Anyway, let's move back into it. Now at Nvidia's booth at CES 2020, I actually used one of the 360Hz monitor, and they were showing a comparison between 60Hz and 360Hz. And I was the single outlier of the day where I actually performed worse in CSGO at 360Hz than I did at 60Hz. But I was reliably informed that most people, in general, in that test, did perform better at 360Hz. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, the smoothness, the fluidity, the general eye candy experience of high refresh rate gaming is really good, and that's what I like. But other people do like the competitive edge that it gives them too. So just some details on the monitor that we'll be using. So we've got the Gigabyte Aorus FI27Q. This is a 27-inch 2560 by 1440 165Hz monitor with a 1 millisecond response time. So as far as I'm concerned, when you're looking at core specifications, that's the gaming sweet spot. I personally like ultra-wide. I've used high refresh rate ultra-wide for a long time, but this is the gaming sweet spot. 27 inches, 165, 1440p. But of course, as I've already highlighted a few times, pushing 1440p, which is a lot of pixels, at 165Hz is demanding even for the most intense hardware. Now yes, you can use techniques like Nvidia's DLSS 2.0 to help you drive higher frame rates, but you can also use other techniques on the monitor side. So this actually supports variable refresh rates, so it is a G-Sync compatible monitor, which means that you can get away with those lower frame rates if your hardware can't quite push, but you don't have to worry about screen tearing or any of those other display issues, and that's a really good thing. I like G-Sync, I like adaptive refresh rate. I've used it for a long time. I'm a massive fan there. And of course, image quality is also important. You've got an IPS panel, 95% DCI P3 color coverage, and you've also got HDR, 1000 to 1 contrast ratio. Really good quality image in my opinion. I was actually very impressed. And another important factor I'm just going to point out is it's got RGB LEDs on the back, because why wouldn't you want RGB LEDs that are controllable through RGB Fusion 2.0 on the back of your monitor? It makes perfect sense, so that the wall can see the reflection of the RGBs. Anyway, I think that's the introduction covered. Let's take a look at the test hardware. First up for the hardware, we've got the graphics cards. So the ones that Gigabyte and Nvidia supported this project with were 2060 Super, RTX 2070 Super, RTX 2080 Ti, and the big boy, the new one, RTX 3080. So of course these are all RTX graphics cards from Nvidia's lineup. They all support ray tracing and DLSS 2.0 in supported games. The 2060 Super and the 2070 Super are Gigabyte's gaming OC graphics cards, so these use a triple fan cooler. The 2080 Ti is our long-term go-to Xtreme version, so the Aorus Xtreme. That uses a very beefy triple fan cooler, a powerful VRM. We've used this graphics card for many months now, been very impressed with it. And then we've got the new King of the Hill from a gaming perspective, if you like, some kind of ignoring the 3090, which is not really a gaming card in my opinion. And this is the RTX 3080, the Eagle OC version that Dom reviewed and was very impressed by. Incidentally, this is pretty much the biggest graphics card I've ever worked with. It doesn't actually fit inside our liquid-cooled system, which is kind of funny, seeing as though we only built this a few weeks ago. Make sure you check out that video. We didn't expect graphics cards of more than 11 inches to come out so soon. Yeah, in hindsight, that was a bit of a dumb move, wasn't it? It wasn't ideal, but this thing is an absolute monster, performed really well in our testing. So we've got what I would say is a reasonable spread of graphics cards, somewhat affordable, kind of mid-range type gamer, going towards high-end enthusiast for the 2080 Ti, and then real enthusiast for the 3080. Moving along to our test platforms, we've got the Gigabyte X570 Aorus Xtreme. So this is our AM4 motherboard of choice. Lovely motherboard. We've used this a few times in the past. It's absolutely glorious. We actually used it building the liquid cooled system and thought that it had issues and that it failed, but it didn't. It was actually just a slight quirk. Works perfectly fine. It's installed right now, looks glorious, fantastic VRM, and this should push our AMD chips absolutely no problem. For the Intel 10th gen test system, we've gone with the Z490 Aorus Master. Strong VRM, well-built motherboard, and this should again be able to push our Intel chips very nicely because they are power hungry, those 10th gen models. CPU of choice, we've gone with the Ryzen 5 3600 XT overclocked at 4.5 GHz. Now I know the XT version is not really the go-to version. People should typically opt for the cheaper non-X or X versions, but this allows us to bump up to 4.5 GHz quite comfortably, still 6 cores and 12 threads, but it'll be interesting because it's high frequency, and that's always been the downfall of Zen 2. So that'll be interesting from that point. The other Ryzen chip of choice is the Ryzen 9 3950X. So this is the 16-core flagship, very expensive chip, overclocked at 4.25 GHz. And then for the Intel test platform, we've gone with the Core i5 10600K overclocked to 5 GHz, 6 cores, 12 threads, really hefty frequency out of the box and both overclocked. Not too bad on the cooling front, really good chip. We really do like this from a gaming perspective, and it'll be interesting to see if it can hang with the slightly higher end, to say the least, Ryzen 9 3950X in gaming, and to see if it can hang with its bigger brother, the 10900K, which is the other Z490 platform chip that we're using. So the Core i9 is obviously the 10-core model. We've overclocked that at 5.1 GHz. This is the best gaming chip on the market. If price is no other issue, if you just want the best gaming chip, obviously the i5 is best from a value perspective perhaps, but flagship performance, and this should really set the bar for the top level of performance we can expect from each configuration. So that'll be an interesting data point. Test monitor, as we've already said, the Gigabyte Aorus FI27Q, 1440p, 165Hz. And then for our ancillary hardware, our partner in hardware, we've got 32 gigs of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 at 3600 MHz C16. We've got a 2TB Aorus Gen 4 SSD alongside a WD Black OS SSD. We get clean power from a Seasonic Prime TX1000 1kW titanium rated power supply. And cooling for the CPUs is handled by liquid cooling hardware, so we don't really have any cooling concerns there for these pretty hefty overclocks we've applied. Our testing logic is going to be looking at the CPU and GPU combinations that make sense for different frame rate intervals at 1080p and at 1440p. If money's no object, it should be quite clear based on the charts which configuration you should buy. But if money is an object, then you have to understand the balance. There could be scenarios where the cheaper CPU with the more expensive GPU is actually a less favorable solution compared to a slightly more expensive CPU with a slightly less expensive GPU. And that's kind of counterintuitive when we're talking about gaming, but that's the reality with high refresh rate gaming. Some CPU and platform combinations are just better at pushing high refresh rates than others. And if you want more details on the test hardware, the configuration, the software we're using, everything like that, head on over to the Kicker website where you can see the written page in more details. Starting off with the Division 2 at 1080p, if you want to average more than 144 FPS using the ultra image quality settings, RTX 2080 Ti level performance is the go-to option. Intel's highly clocked Skylake-based chips are a little faster in general, and that is particularly true when the GPU might of an RTX 2080 Ti or RTX 3080 is leveraged. Note, however, that the Core i5 10600K consistently struggled with its 1% low FPS performance when coupled with the RTX 2080 Ti. Still, over 90 FPS is little to complain about. Turning up the resolution to 1440p will necessitate the new RTX 3080 on any of the platforms to get close to 140 FPS. The RTX 2060 Super and 2070 Super push past 60 FPS on average, but reduced image quality settings are needed if you want to pass 100 FPS with these cards. Note that Intel's lead versus AMD's chips is minor and insignificant at this resolution and associated FPS range. The Ryzen 5 3600 XT performs particularly well in comparison to the Core i5 10600K thanks to the AMD chip's superior 1% low FPS values. Recon Breakpoint shows strong preference for Intel's system when pushing past 140 FPS. AMD's mainstream flagship 3950X does, however, hang well with the Intel pair even when coupled with an RTX 3080. The Ryzen 5 3600 XT is clearly struggling to keep pace with the more costly CPUs when coupled with high-end graphics cards. This is one of those somewhat rare situations where the 6-core Zen 2 chip with a technically faster graphics card will actually run slower than an Intel competitor with a technically less powerful graphics card. The stress of 1440p compresses the margins between different CPU options. This time, the Ryzen 5 3600 XT can just about hang with the rest of the pack even when coupled with RTX 3080 caliber hardware. This image quality level and pixel count demand is tough to push at high refresh rates. The RTX 2080 Ti manages to average a triple-digit number, but only the RTX 3080 can get past the 120 FPS level. Grand Theft Auto 5 is an old but still immensely popular DX11 title that shows heavy CPU-based performance limitations and preference for Intel hardware. At 1080p, the CPU is the more important factor with our test and image quality settings, as evidenced by the 5.1 GHz Core i9-10900K topping the chart with all graphics card combinations. These image quality and test settings are not particularly tolerable for high refresh rate gaming, especially in certain GTA 5 sections such as grassy areas or fast image streaming whilst flying. However, each hardware solution can push it around 100 FPS or higher, and the 10900K manages close enough to 120 FPS for our liking. GTA 5's CPU-influenced performance limitations are further shown at 1440p, with the performance numbers changing by small amounts despite the vast pixel count increase. This time, however, the high-end graphics cards in the form of RTX 2080 Ti and RTX 3080 show their muscle at the top of the chart. The Ryzen chips still struggle to pass 100 FPS convincingly, but this is a common theme with GTA 5's strong preference for Intel Skylake architecture. In F1 2020, we see that all of the solutions on display offer competitive high refresh rate performance at 1080p. Even the RTX 2060 Super coupled with the affordable 6-core CPUs will deliver over 130 FPS on average. If you want to hit the monitor's 165Hz refresh rate on average, an RTX 2080 Ti is a solid choice, though the Intel chips do just about manage the task with the RTX 2070 Super. This is another example of Intel's enhanced gaming prowess for the highly clocked Skylake-based chips in high refresh rate gaming scenarios. Moving up to 1440p, we still see Intel's outperformance with each graphics card combination that is notable with RTX 2080 Ti and RTX 3080 caliber graphics cards. With that said, the Zen 2 chips continue to offer competitive performance and get close to the 165 FPS target, coupled with the 2080 Ti. If you're happy with 120 FPS on average and some variable refresh rate monitor benefits, the RTX 2070 Super is a strong choice on either the Intel or AMD platforms. One of the things we noticed in our testing was that the 2070 Super did a pretty good job in F1 2020 at 1440p, but it couldn't get above about 120 frames per second on average on the Intel system. So, given that we're using a 165Hz monitor and we'd like to ideally get above 144, we're going to put the 2070 Super back in and we're going to apply NVIDIA's DLSS 2.0 technology, and we're going to see how that helps us push higher frames per second numbers and closer to the ideal refresh rate of the monitor, so closer to that 165. So let's remove the 2080 Ti, install the 2070 Super, and see just how much extra performance DLSS can give us and whether we're still happy with the image quality. To enable DLSS, we're just going to jump into the settings. We're going to keep everything the same, but we're going to go down to anti-aliasing, and previously it was TAA. So instead we're going to enable NVIDIA DLSS. I'm going to back out. I'm just going to quickly restart the game to make sure that applied. Well, I've already restarted anyway, so that's definitely applied. And then let's run the benchmark again and see what difference this makes. So previously we were getting kind of 110 to 120 to 130 FPS in the beginning sections. Let's have a look what we get this time. So we're already a bit higher at the beginning, 130 or so FPS at the beginning. When it takes off, let's see what difference it is. So you're talking 120, 130. So we are higher. Yeah, about 135. So we're pushing closer to that 144 Hz sweet spot. Obviously with this monitor, ideally we'd want 165, but anything above about 140, realistically above 120 is good, but above 140 is really pretty sweet indeed with the variable refresh rate support. 135, 140. So it's given a pretty significant boost to the frame rate on our 2070 Super. At 150 we saw flash there. So it is certainly up in the performance quite a bit. The image quality is still very good in my opinion. So we are seeing a tangible boost. That's one of the good examples of NVIDIA DLSS being applied here. Intel performs well in Metro Exodus at 1080p with the 5 GHz Core i5 and 5.1 GHz Core i9 occupying the top spots comfortably. Almost 120 FPS or higher is achieved with an RTX 3080 on all chips or an RTX 2080 Ti on the Intel CPUs. The performance drop-off down to the RTX 2070 Super is sizable, so even at 1080p, image quality reductions will be necessary to push closer to a triple-digit FPS level with the more affordable graphics cards. Pushing past 100 FPS is going to require an RTX 3080 at these image quality settings. Intel continues to outperform AMD Zen 2 chips thanks in large to frequency advantages. However, the margins are far slimmer with the higher stress of a 1440p resolution applied. Red Dead Redemption 2 is another title that shows preference for Intel hardware. Using the high, not maximum, image quality settings, we can get close to 140 FPS average using the RTX 3080 and 10th gen CPUs. AMD Zen 2 competitors are better suited for a 120 FPS target with the powerful graphics card, though they do show less positive 1% low FPS numbers. Up in the resolution maintains the Intel versus AMD trends, but now an RTX 3080 is only capable of just over 100 FPS on average. If you want to push closer to 144-165 FPS, the image quality settings will have to be reduced accordingly. Likewise, image quality reductions will serve a purpose for delivering better, higher than 60Hz performance for the pair of more affordable supercards. We consistently see Shadow of the Tomb Raider distinguishing between more and less powerful CPUs at 1080p with our testing configuration. That point is particularly true when looking at the Ryzen 5 3600 XT CPU's performance. A mix of lower clock speed versus the Intel chips and less cache and cores versus the 3950X sees AMD's affordable Zen 2 offering deliver notable bottlenecks for high-end graphics cards. Similar behaviour is exhibited with the 3950X versus the higher clocked Intel parts. With that said, all of the solutions on show deliver above 120 FPS on average, so there really is not a bad solution to pick from. The Core i9-10900K is ludicrously fast, but even it cannot offer up enough performance for the RTX 3080 to show its might past 180 FPS. 1440p continues to show Intel outperformance, but this time the Ryzen 9 3950X is able to close the gap by virtue of reduced overall FPS numbers. All of the solutions with the RTX 2080 Ti or RTX 3080 manage close enough to 140 FPS or higher. Even the RTX 2070 Super delivers triple-digit average FPS numbers using the highest preset in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, making it a tempting proposition for gamers with tighter budgets. If you want to push for around 140 FPS in Borderlands 3 with badass quality settings, an RTX 3080 will be the go-to option even at 1080p. Data from the Intel chips is unavailable due to the game consistently crashing, but the difference between AMD's 6-core and 16-core Zen 2 chips is negligible. 1440p adds more stress to the GPU, and now only the RTX 3080 can manage more than 100 FPS on average. Realistically, you will want to reduce the image quality settings for the RTX 2080 Ti and below to achieve a preferable high refresh rate gaming experience in our test configuration. There we have it then, a lot of data presented, a lot of numbers there, but I think we can see the clear patterns. If you want to push high refresh rates at this 1440p resolution, if you want to get anywhere near kind of 165 Hz, you're going to need a lot of GPU horsepower and the right CPU too. What we see throughout is that the Core i5 and the 10900K, they do cement their positions as very good gaming CPUs. The 10900K is obviously, it's just the best gaming CPU on the market. We still think the 10600K is probably the best from a value perspective, and it proves that throughout our testing. It's able to hang close to the 10900K quite often. It's able to generally outperform the Ryzen competitors, the Zen 2 competitors, but the Zen 2 competitors do a very good job also. You just have to understand the limitations in certain games, typically older games that are DX11, the likes of Grand Theft Auto 5, which is a very old game at this point, but still very popular and still a fan favourite amongst many, myself included. So there's not really a bad solution at all. I think from the GPU perspective, the RTX 3080, absolute monster. I think this is a great card. I know the launch has had some headaches, let's not beat around the bush there. But from a gaming performance perspective, it's just a fantastic card, really, really good offering. And then the 2080 Ti actually impressed us too. So we put in consistently strong numbers that are pushing towards the refresh rate of the 1440p monitor. So this still proves itself as a really competitive solution for 1440p high refresh rate gaming. And that's important because hopefully, fingers crossed, the RTX 3070 that is due in a few weeks' time will prove to be as good as Nvidia's suggestions are. It will prove to be similar performance to the 2080 Ti, but at a really competitive price point. And that will be a nice sweet spot for gamers. Can you get maybe a monitor of this caliber, which is really nice, really high refresh rate, great specifications, great picture quality, plus a good 3070 for $1,000 or a little over? That'd be quite a nice bundle in my opinion. So there we have it. Hopefully this information, this testing has been helpful in allowing you to understand some of the configurations you might be looking at if you want high refresh rate gaming, if you're happy with 100 Hz, if you want 120 FPS or 140 or 165 non-stop. Hopefully there's plenty of information in the charts that you can delve into in your own time, that you can understand from the settings in the games, the compromises you're happy to make. Hopefully you get that information and you can make good purchasing decisions based on that. So thanks to Gigabyte for supporting this project. Really interesting, really nice monitor, good selection of hardware. It's great to work with all these graphics cards. I do certainly have a fun job, to say the least, and hopefully the information is very useful to you. And if it is, make sure you sound off in the comment section down below. Let us know what you think. Are you really impressed by the Core i5? I was personally quite impressed by the Core i5 in general. We knew it was a good chip, but it cements its position as a really good gaming chip for the quite competitive price that it comes in at. The 10900K continues to impress from the gaming perspective, and the Zen 2 chips, given their balance outside of gaming and their strong performance outside of gaming, they continue to impress me every day. So no real negatives here. Yeah, you're going to have to spend a pretty penny if you want some high refresh rate gaming with nice pixel counts, but that's the way it goes. We're enthusiast gamers, that's what we like. I've been Luke Hill for Kikuru. Thank you for watching this content. Let us know what you think in the comment section down below. If you like this video, give us a like, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, do all our YouTube stuff. Head on over to the main Kikuru website to read the written piece, that really helps us out. And visit our Patreon page if you want to support us even more. And also our merch store where you can buy a cool t-shirt. And I will see you in the next one. I'm off to do some gaming.